Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 287th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast, and welcome to the start of the 7th year of the podcast. Don't forget the podcast is now fortnightly, but if you're missing weekly content, you have 6 years worth of work to reflect back on, and you might want my handy guide that lists the episodes with a clickable link, and you can get this at bit.ly/DMPG23. As I mentioned last time in episode 286, the reflection episode on 6 years of podcasting, this year I'll be focusing on current affairs and how they affect the workplace and what can be done, or how things can be used in a positive way in a workplace context. Now, if you've seen any news in the last 2 weeks or indeed 5 days, even fleetingly, you will know that anti-immigrant, anti-asylum seeker and anti-refugee fascist protests have been in the news, and the raising of the St. George's flags across the UK. I say raising, actually, it's planting of flags on lampposts and in public spaces, in particular in England, as well as mini roundabouts being painted with red crosses. So this month's episodes are going to be in 3 parts: the issues at the moment, what we can do in the workplace, and future proofing. And as always, I want to start with definitions, as I feel this is extremely important and the language gets conflated. So firstly, I've used definitions from the charity International Rescue Committee, as I thought they were very clear and succinct to aid understanding. So firstly, who is a refugee? So the problem I think we have in mainstream media is refugee, asylum seeker, and immigrant and illegal immigrant are all used interchangeably, but it is different. So let's start with who is a refugee. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee their home because of war, violence, or persecution, often without warning. They are unable to return home unless and until conditions in their native lands are safe for them again. And I think it's important to say that it should be deemed safe by them, not by a government that hasn't got a clue of what's going on. And a refugee is not an identity. So a refugee is a forced experience. It's not an identity. People don't identify as refugees, even though the media may make them. A refugee is a forced experience. Okay, so let's move on to who is an asylum seeker. An asylum seeker is someone who is seeking international protection from dangers in their home country, but whose claim for refugee status hasn't been determined legally. Asylum seekers must apply for protection in the country of destination, meaning they must arrive at or cross a border in order to apply. They then must be able to prove to authorities. Now, please remember, this will depend on the country, the conditions, what paperwork someone has or may not have, how accepted it is, if it can be translated, and the list goes on. But then they must be able to prove to authorities that they then meet the criteria to be covered by refugee protections. And not every asylum seeker will be recognized as a refugee. Okay, then finally, who is a migrant? A migrant is an umbrella term which does not have a legal definition under international law. It usually describes someone who has left their home either within their country or across borders. This can be temporary or permanent and can be due to various reasons. So it could be environmental. It's usually to seek a better life or to have better opportunities. And what about illegal immigrants? So this term illegal immigrants, refugee, asylum seeker, completely conflated. And the Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford says illegal immigrant is typical, in quotation marks, and I think that's important, is typically applied to people who enter a country illegally or overstay their visa, people who are refused asylum, now that's very important, but remain in the country, and children born into the UK to quote unquote unauthorized parents. They are not allowed to work or eligible for housing or benefits. Now, this is really, really important. And last year in 2024, we saw fascist riots, and we're seeing them again. And please check out episode 261, What Should Workplaces Do Now After the Racist Riots? And in fact, that episode was released at the same time last year. So have we even moved on? But it's a slightly different episode, and I go more into sort of strategies and how people might be feeling. And again, like last time, I ask you to check in with colleagues, staff, and team members to see how they are. Many of us are really scared right now and feel despondent, and that there is very little challenge at a governmental level. And so having someone check in and ask us does feel really important. Some people don't care and think it's stupid, so they're not buying into it. But the impact it's having on many citizens and communities is significant in a negative way. And I say that with a really heavy heart. But as always, I really hope you're finding this podcast useful and the content useful and you want to keep up to date. If you do, then why not join my newsletter? When you join, you'll receive my white paper on inclusive language and mental health at work. And that link is bit.ly/ILMHCK. So for anyone who thinks that we live in a post-racial society, I hope this supports you to reflect on the fact that none of this has gone away and the threat is still there. I think certain politicians who don't have many MPs get far too much airtime when other parties have the same number of MPs and do not get the same airtime at all, or in fact are more established and have more MPs and still are not getting the same airtime. Practical action is key. There needs to be sensitivity in conversation, so we can say to our colleagues, how are you feeling? Would you like to talk about it? Or actually, I'm quite worried about the flags I've seen in flagpoles, in lampposts that have come up in my neighborhood. I don't really understand it. Is this something that we'd like to talk about as a team? How are we feeling? And that could be whether you have people from different backgrounds or not, because it's affecting people in different ways. And remember that this is ongoing, and adapt things and in terms of progress and check in with staff. And if you want to know more about challenging dominant narratives, please check out episode 263 for more information on how to do this. But one thing I wanted to focus on in this episode is facts against a very dangerous narrative. And I've actually been talking to quite a few people, and I have a neighbor and she works in the refugee space and she's received death threats. There's actually been a right-wing YouTuber that has mentioned her and released names of people and trustees who are part of refugee charities. Now, of course, that information is public, but again, the way that he's released these names, and I think my understanding is encouraged people to be attacked or to be, as it was, held to account from a right-wing perspective, is really, really scary. And, many of us have friends who work in this space, colleagues. This is, really frightening. So there've been a couple of things, on social media, and then I've clicked on the link to read the article. And then, of course, I've looked at the comments on the social media space. And I've seen things along the lines of, I cannot wait to see them all deported on the planes. There'll be 5 planes a day to get them out. I welcome a certain person into the government. And of course, I think it's important to mention with incorrect spelling and grammar. So this got me thinking about the costs and how feasible it would be in reality if this were the case. And I've used the bbc.co.uk's verifier, and I've put the link in the show notes if you want to check that out. So this was kind of my fact checking, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but they've looked at current population statistics and recent Home Office external assessment, which looked at the economic impact of illegal migration. So this is interesting for me, because my first thing was, so you want to put all of us, probably including people like me, on a plane. Planes aren't like buses. You can't just say, right, we are going to India via Lithuania, Romania, Poland, and we'll be parachuting people out as we go. So, of course, it's a costly exercise. And if we were to give people right to remain, and we were to support people in finding jobs, we have to think about the flip side of that, which is how much VAT from people spending money the government would get, how many people are paying income tax that would generate amount of money for the government as well. If people are buying homes, stamp duty, yes, that might change. But all of this is much better. And that's not my reason for saying, get people to stay. But this rhetoric around illegal immigration, when you want to put people on planes, is going to be far more costly. And I'll give you the example of how the information I've used to work this out. So recent Home Office external assessment looked at the economic impact of the previous government's illegal migration bill. And it costs around, according to this, £22,000 per person, not per flight. Okay. So per person being returned to quote unquote their home country. It is also believed that there are currently around 600,000 illegal immigrants, which actually isn't very much when you think of our population is between around 65 to 67 million people in the UK. So if I've done the calculation correctly, which is £22,000 times 600,000 illegal immigrants, that actually works out to £13.2 billion. Right. So who would pay for this? This is very interesting to me. And when I was reading these horrific comments, I didn't respond back, but it really, really got me thinking, who would pay for this? So if we're putting all these people on flights, instead they could be, having jobs, paying tax, contributing to the economy and to life as they want to. They want to live safely and recover and have a chance, as the way as humanity should be. Where is this money going to come from? And also, what then stops legal people being deported, as we've seen with Windrush cases, and still no compensation? So not only would it be 13.2 billion, we're then looking at the loss of doctors, nurses, care workers, bus drivers, opticians. The list is endless. Restaurants, news agents. So I always talk about this. Where would people get their cigarettes from, their alcohol from? Particularly in city areas. Where would they get their Friday night Indian food? Where would they get their Friday night Chinese food? Fill in the blank. We could keep going with all of that. Lawyers, professional services. So 13.2 billion, loss of public services, lack of people to do that, and also a huge chunk of money missing in terms of how people could, through working would pay their NI, their income, etc. So in the next episode, I'll be breaking it down more around what workplaces can do to manage conversations and how to support staff in more detail. And I do appreciate in the meantime, we may not want to get into these arguments and get into it, but please, let's do your own research and think about the figures. So you might want them to hand, or even for your own confirmation of how it would work economically. I think that's very interesting. And I don't feel that information is out there. It's very easy to have these sound bites. And also, please remember, we can be allies, and that's all of us. So those of us who are established in this country, those of us who might be newer arrivals but have got indefinite leave to remain, those of us who are, white British people, we can all do things. So for more information about this, check out episode number 41, Racism and Genuine Allyship, and episode 69, How Real Allyship Can Make a Difference. As always, there's still a lot of work to do. Allyship never stops, no matter who we are. The facts and figures don't add up, and I think that's useful to know. And we often have to search for the evidence and data, but it's useful. Tune in next time to find out more about what can be done. And remember that creating a positive environment where we can support all our staff is not just beneficial for individual employees, but also boosts morale, engagement, and retention across an organization. So if you're looking to foster a positive wellbeing culture and would like guidance on creating strategies tailored to your team's needs, Diverse Minds is here to support you. So do reach out to me to explore training, consultancy, and coaching services designed to build a healthy, resilient workplace culture. And you can email me at Layla, that's Leyla, at diverseminds.co.uk. And I really hope you've enjoyed today's show and all the shows over the last 6 years. And if you have, why not write me a review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget my TEDx talk, where I talk about my experience of navigating race, culture, and mental health. And it's something you can watch on your break, as it's just 12 minutes long. And that link is bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVESLO. And as always, don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I hope that's been useful. I look forward to you joining me in a fortnight's time. We're going to talk more about how to handle this, conversations in the workplace, and what you can do. But in the meantime, as always, everyone, take care, stay safe, and support one another. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.